I need to report on some seriously dictatorial and authoritarian crap coming out of the Trump administration right now, which is blatantly unconstitutional and which, ironically enough, but not surprisingly, is coming out of the Department of Justice. Just came across an article about what the DOJ plans to do with respect to Donald Trump's immigration enforcement efforts. Let me pull up this article here. This is from the Washington Post. Justice Department says it will prosecute local officials over immigration enforcement. Soon as I read that, I knew exactly where this was going, and I'm like, okay, this is flatly unconstitutional. Let me just read a little bit of this. The Trump administration, late Tuesday, directed federal prosecutors nationwide to investigate and potentially prosecute state and local officials who don't cooperate with the president's plan to carry out the largest mass deportation campaign in U.S. history. In a memo to Justice Department employees, Acting Deputy Attorney General Emil Bove wrote that the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution and other legal authorities, quote, require state and local actors to comply with the executive branch's immigration and enforcement initiatives. All right, this is complete horseshit. This is not true. The Constitution requires no such thing. But why don't we go right to the memo itself? And I want to direct your attention to this one paragraph here. Get my lovely face more in frame there. Sorry for cutting off this paragraph, but I shall read it to you. Okay, let's read. The Supremacy Clause and other authorities require state and local actors to comply with the executive branch's immigration enforcement initiatives. Federal law prohibits state and local actors from resisting, obstructing, and otherwise failing to comply with lawful immigration-related commands and requests pursuant to, for example, the President's extensive Article 2 authority, blah, 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 blah. Okay. This is not true. Let us begin, shall we, with the Supremacy Clause itself, since this jackass is citing the Supremacy Clause to support this proposition that state and local officials have to help federal law enforcement enforce federal law. So let's go to the Supremacy Clause, which can be found in Article 6 of the Constitution, and it reads thus. This Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land. Now let me read that again, and I'll take out the part about treaties, since obviously treaties are not relevant here. This Constitution and the laws of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land. That's the important part right there. So do you hear anything in that requires state and local officials to help federal law enforcement or immigration officials enforce federal law? Absolutely not. The Constitution, the Supremacy Clause, requires no such thing. Let me explain what the Supremacy Clause actually does. And it's very clear, right from which I'll read one more time. This Constitution and the laws of the United States, meaning federal laws. This Constitution and federal laws shall be the supreme law of the land. That's what it says. And what that means is that in our system, we have two sovereign governmental systems. We have the federal government and we have the state governments. And the federal government has the Constitution and federal laws. State governments have state constitution and state laws, and also local laws. Now, usually there's no problem there, right? They're not in conflict with one another, right? They have to do with separate things. Now, sometimes they have to do with the same thing, but usually the feds will pass a law and the state law will mirror the federal law. So there'll be a state and federal law on the same issue, but they both pretty much say the same thing. There may be slight variations and difference in punishments and things like that, but they're not in conflict with one another. Sometimes, however, there are federal laws that are in conflict with state laws. They're at cross purposes. And when that happens, the Supremacy Clause tells us which set of laws prevails. It's the U.S. Constitution and the federal laws. So if a state law conflicts with the Constitution, then, did I say federal or state? If a state law conflicts with the Constitution, then that state law is null and void. If a state law conflicts with a federal law, then the state law is null and void because it conflicts, and because pursuant to the Supremacy Clause, which tells us in a conflict, it's the federal Constitution and the federal law which trumps the state Constitution and state law. So that's what the Supremacy Clause means. That's all that it means. It does not mean that state and local officials take orders from the federal government or have to help them enforce federal law. It absolutely does not mean that. So this idea that's going out in a memo to all federal prosecutors from the acting deputy attorney general saying that we are going to investigate and possibly prosecute state and local officials who do not, as they say, comply with lawful immigration-related commands and requests, that is some seriously dictatorial shit. State and local officials do not take orders from federal officials. I don't care if it's the president himself. If the president himself called up a local police chief and said, your guys are going to help my guys round up people, that local police chief could say, Mr. President, go fuck yourself. And he would be perfectly within his constitutional right to do so, because he does not take orders from the President of the United States. Now, if he tried that with the governor, that might be a different situation. But not the President of the United States, because they are two completely different and sovereign systems. And nobody over here in the state system is answerable to anyone here in the federal system, including the freaking President of the United States. Nobody here has to take orders from anybody here. That is not how it works. And to suggest otherwise, to suggest it, as this jerk does in this memo, that federal officials and the president can order state and local officials to make them comply and help them enforce federal law, that is turning the Constitution on its head. That is turning the concept of federalism on its head. In our system, that is not the case. And I know people misunderstand how all of this works, largely because they watch too damn much TV. And we've all seen it a million times. You know, you'll be watching a police drama, and there'll be a crime scene, and you'll have a local sheriff or local cops there investigating, and then suddenly the FBI swoops in. And they say, we're taking over this investigation. And they start barking orders at the local cops. And the local cops, you know, step and fetch it, and they do whatever the FBI tells them to. That's not how it happens. Okay? State cops don't take orders from the FBI or any other federal officials. All right? If the FBI shows up and starts barking orders, state cops can tell them to go pound sand. And just because the FBI might be investigating a local crime, if they have jurisdiction to do so, doesn't mean that the local cops have to stop investigating. This is not how it works at all. Certainly not how it's supposed to work. And this is an assault on our constitutional system. And I tell you what needs to happen. This is where we need to draw the line over the next 4 years, over this issue of federalism. You know, it's funny because politics are being completely turned on its head in this country. It used to be that Republicans and conservatives, now this group of Republicans is not conservatives. They're fascists, if anything, but they're not conservatives. They're not constitutionalists in any way. But it used to be Republicans and conservatives were the ones who were always talking about federalism and states' rights, and that the states have to stand up against federal overreach. Well, now it's the exact opposite. Now we have Republicans who are all for big authoritarian federal government overstepping federal authority and telling states what to do. And it's Democratic governors and mayors and state and local officials who need to draw the line and stand up to this crap and say, hell no. We don't have to do a damn thing you say. Because those are the only people right now, state and local officials, who can stand up against this federal overreach. Because you're not going to get it from Washington. Who's going to stand up in Washington? Republicans control everything in Washington. And Democrats, I mean, there's nothing they could do. They don't have the numbers. But even if they did, they probably wouldn't do a damn thing. They're so pathetic. I mean, they can't even message, right? They suck at even messaging. But they can't do anything anyway. So we need to look to the states. We need to look to courageous governors and mayors to stand up to this crap. And by the way, I don't think they're going to do squat. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think they're going to arrest any local officials. Now, it depends what they do. I mean, federal law, one thing they get right here, where they say federal law prohibits state and local actors, well, anybody. Federal law prohibits anybody from resisting or obstructing federal law enforcement. So if a mayor were to actively obstruct a federal immigration official from doing their jobs, that's a different story. They can be arrested and prosecuted for that just like anyone else. But by simply saying, we're not going to help you, we don't take orders from you, and not only, because they say here, federal law prohibits state and local actors from resisting, obstructing, and otherwise failing to comply with lawful immigration-related commands and requests. They don't have to friggin' follow commands or comply with requests from the federal government. If they give them a command, they can say, go pound sand. If they say, oh, I have a request, can you do this, that, and the other for us? They could say, no, your request is denied. We're not doing squat. So this is a complete lie that state and local actors are required. No one is required to comply with requests. This is all just Anyways, I think you get the point. I'm going to be talking a lot more about federalism because this is where the fight needs to be. Because for two reasons. One, it's really the only place we can fight back right now. Because as I say, we have no power in Washington. So it has to come from the states. And number two, because if the Trump administration is trying to force states and localities to do what they want, making them nothing more than an appendage of the federal government, that needs to be resisted. Because that is not what our constitutional system is. And if people go along with that, then they are allowing Donald Trump to fundamentally alter our basic constitutional system. And by the way, this memo is just an intimidation tactic. That's what this is. They're not going to arrest, and they know damn well that this is not constitutional at all. That they have no basis to try to force state and local officials to help them enforce immigration law. And if they don't help them, that they can arrest them. They know that that is completely illegal, completely unconstitutional. They can't do it. And if they did, those cases would get thrown out immediately. They know this. This is meant to intimidate. They knew this. This really is a public relations letter. This is really not even so much a letter to prosecutors. It's a letter to all these governors and local officials. They're the intended audience for this. They just want to scare these people into thinking that they will be arrested if they don't help Donald Trump round up immigrants. And thereby get their cooperation. Get state and local police and sheriffs to help the federal government round people up. That's what this is about. It's about scaring these people into compliance. Not that they're actually going to prosecute anybody or arrest anybody, but just making them worried that they might. And putting the fear in them so that they will help the federal government. That's what this is about. It's all about intimidation. And doing any of this is completely unconstitutional and needs to be resisted. So I hope over the next 4 years we see some real leadership coming out of the states to stand up against this, stand on the Constitution, because they are on solid constitutional footing to say no to all of this federal government overreach from the Trump administration. They do not take orders from the federal government. They do not have to comply with commands from Donald Trump. Tell Donald Trump to go F himself. That's what needs to be the position of Democratic governors and mayors and other elected officials. Go F yourself, Donald Trump. You can't make me do shit. And these states need to start rethinking what money they want to take from the federal government. Because most of the ways in which the federal government is able to tell states what to do is by dangling money. Money with strings attached. And if you accept that money, and in order to continue receiving that money, you have to do what we say. And that's how the federal government and Donald Trump will get states to do what he wants. It's by getting them to accept money and then meeting all the conditions in order to receive that money. Now, I know it's so hard to walk away from money from the federal government, but to preserve the constitutional order of things in this country, I hope that some states begin to do exactly that and say, you know what? Keep your damn money. Because it comes with all these strings and I'm not taking orders from you. No. And if you don't like, for example, you don't like what Donald Trump is going to be doing through the Department of Education, assuming he doesn't abolish it, any regulations and things coming out of the Department of Education that you don't want to see implemented in your local schools, then stop taking money. Stop taking education grants and other money through the Department of Education. If you stop taking that money, you don't have to comply with their mandates. I know it's easier said than done, tight budgets, money from the federal government. But don't complain about the regulations and orders coming out of the Department of Education that you now have to implement in your schools when you are choosing to take that money. Because you're making a choice. You do not have to comply with any of those rules and dictates coming from the Department of Education or any other. Unless you take the money. Then you have to in order to continue taking the money. So it's a choice. Anyway, that's it. I think I droned on enough about this. I hope this has made sense. I know whenever I try to talk about these constitutional issues, I can tell from the comments, it goes right over some people's heads. I hope most of y'all understood all this, because this is really where we have to fight the battle, and it's important that you guys understand this, and I will be talking a lot more about it in the future. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.